Hello and welcome to our Black History Month Assembly.
Firstly, we would like to introduce ourselves as Bromley High's Diversity Committee, including myself, Kesley,
Tolu,
Nancy,
Pippa.
We have many exciting events happening during Black History Month this year, including a whole school quiz, Science Journal Club special editions, house competitions, Instagram polls, a knowledge trail, and more.
Today we are going to be talking to you about Black Tudor history and the origins of Black History Month.
Black History Month occurs every October in the UK and February in the US. It celebrates the culture, history and achievement of Britain's African and Caribbean communities with aims to promote knowledge of the Black culture, history and heritage and disseminate information on positive Black contributions to society and heighten the confidence and awareness of Black people about their cultural heritage.
The story of Black History Month begins in 1915, half a century after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States.
In September of that year, Harvard historian Carter Woodson and minister Jesse Morgan founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which was dedicated to researching and promoting achievements by African Americans and Black people globally.
When do you think Negro History Week was first celebrated in the United States? The answer is B, 1926. The second week of February was chosen to coincide with Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthdays.
Frederick Douglass was an American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, statesman and writer. After escaping from slavery in Maryland, he became a national leader of the abolitionist movement in Massachusetts and New York, gaining note for his oratory and incisive anti-slavery writings.
The event inspired schools and communities nationwide to organise local elections, establish history clubs and performances and lectures.
In the decades that followed, cities across the country began annually recognising Black History Week, and by the late 1960s, thanks partly to the Civil Rights Movement, Black History Week had evolved into Black History Month on many college campuses.
President Gerald Ford officially recognised Black History Month in 1976, calling upon the public to seize the opportunity to honour the two often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavour throughout history.
Since 1976, every American president has designated February as Black History Month and has endorsed a specific theme.
Black History Month was first celebrated in London, England, in 1987, with the aim to challenge racism and teach others about the history not in the school curriculum.
Every October, Black British History Month is celebrated throughout the UK. Boris Johnson has said that the event always provides a fantastic opportunity for us to recognise the outstanding contributions people of African and Caribbean descent have made to our country over many generations. The Pan-African flag, created in 1920, is an emblem of pride and features which colours? The answer is D, red, green and black. Red symbolises the blood that unites all the people of Black ancestry and the bloodshed for liberation. Black symbolises the Black people and green symbolises the natural abundant wealth of Africa.
The banner with its horizontal red, black and green stripes was adopted by the Universal Negro Improvement Association at a conference in New York City in 1920. For several years leading up to that point, Marcus Garvey, the UNIA's leader, talked about the need for a Black liberation flag.
These days, Pan-African flags fly on some Black-owned businesses or in neighbourhoods in cities like Philadelphia, where Marcus Garvey had a big historical influence.
In our assembly today, we are turning our attention to the lives of free Black people living in Europe and collaboration between Europeans and Africans.
Oftentimes, Africa is only mentioned in the school curriculum when children are taught about the slave trade, and there is the wider misconception that any African living outside of Africa before the mid-19th century must have been enslaved.
However, that's exactly what it is, a misconception. Black people were present in the royal courts of Henry VII, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and James I, and have played a fascinating role throughout history.
It was thought that people of African origin first arrived in England in 1948 when the Empire Windrush docked at Tilbury. However, we now know that the Portuguese were the first Europeans to visit Africa, while en route to India in the 15th century, and they brought the first enslaved Africans to Europe in 1444.
Since then, a substantial black population developed across southern Europe, with smaller numbers appearing in northern Europe.
There are many theories as to whom the first black person in England was, but it is certain that black people were present during the Tudor period, and we'll be looking further in depth at their lives today.
Before the emergence of the British Empire, Tudor England was a small and relatively weak Protestant nation on the edge of Europe that hadn't yet fully been exposed to the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade or colonial plantation slavery.
It would be false to say that xenophobia wasn't present at all in Tudor England, but on occasions when black Tudors encountered Tudor Englishmen, the Englishman was shown to be curious about the world beyond the sea.
Tudors were more likely to judge someone based upon their social class or religion, rather than their place of birth or skin colour. However, these did intersect, and that meant that black people with a lower social ranking were treated much worse than their black counterparts, despite the widespread belief that a slave became free by his arrival in England. Even today, intersectionality plays a big role in society.
It is the interconnected nature of social categories such as race, class and gender that apply to a given individual or group, which creates overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Therefore, skilled black people often treated better. A great example of this is the life of John Blank, a black trumpeter for King Henry VIII.
This is the only identifiable portrait of a black person in Tudor England.
In the portrait taken from the Westminster Tournament Roll, Blank is shown playing a cavalry trumpet whilst wearing a turban, which suggests his Islamic heritage, and we think that he was probably born in North or West Africa.
He probably came from a musical family because, like many trades, knowledge was often passed down from father to son.
Trumpeters played a vital role in the royal court as part of royal entries, tournaments, funerals, executions, banquets, weddings, coronations, battles and sea voyages.
His position as a trumpeter in the royal court would have brought not only a higher status, but also a regular wage, board, lodging and a clothing allowance.
What do you think his annual wage was? The answer is D, £12.
The life of Blank definitely challenges many ideas about ethnic identity and racism in Tudor England, and shows us that even back then, Africans were able to find a meaningful place in English society.
Another example of a black person living in Europe during the Tudor era is a woman called Catalina, who lived in Gloucestershire just outside of Bristol up until her death in 1625.
What we know of her life is clear only through an inventory of her belongings, which shows that her most valuable possession was a cow, which would have supplied her with milk and butter and allowed her to make a living by selling these products to neighbours.
She owned no furniture, indicating that she most likely shared her home, possibly with the widow Helen Ford, who administered her estate.
What is clear overall from the surviving inventory of Catalina's belongings is that she was not in fact enslaved, but owned goods, from cooking utensils to a tablecloth, which were valued at approximately £6, 9 shillings and 6p.
In addition to this, names such as Catalina and Diego are indications that Africans in Britain and Northern Europe likely travelled through the Iberic region before their arrival in Europe.
These are only two examples of black people living in Tudor Britain, and throughout Europe, showing that the transatlantic slave trade was in fact not the start of Black history, and that Black people in Europe were not always enslaved.
We hope that this assembly has challenged your views of what Black history is, and we look forward to celebrating Black History Month 2020 with you. Make sure you get involved. Thanks for listening.